Welcome to what is now our last session with the Magic Dance, Thinley Norbu Rinpoche's teaching on the display of the self-nature of the 5 wisdom dakinis. What we have here is the quintessential Vajrayana teaching, really. And there's a lot of reference in this work here to teachings which we can aspire to will be translated and taught in the modern world. Rinpoche has this ability to really, in a very poetic way, present teachings of the most esoteric or profound Vajrayana without really going into the details of it. And yet, us hearing this and also practicing the path that's associated with these teachings will provide the auspicious conditions for these teachings undoubtedly to be taught to those who persevere in this path. As always, we should recognize that anything that we do in the Buddhist teaching, and particularly in the Mahayana, is about going to the depth of what causes suffering universally. So our intention with a study like this should really be that we intend to apply it in terms of practice, really so that we can be there for others. So this motivation of bodhicitta we have as the very ground of this study. And also what really enables us to connect with this is the quality of trust. The teacher is very important in the Buddhist teaching. As you noted when we were studying this text, I put in a few pictures of Rinpoche. And I do this, of course, in general, when we study textual material in the modern world, we don't really make a big fuss out of the author. Very often we have no idea who the author is or what they look like. We might have an idea about the credentials of a particular author. We don't really sort of continually come back to photos of the teacher. The reason we do that in the Vajrayana is because the Vajrayana is so much founded on that which lies beyond the ordinary rational mind, and which really is introduced through the presence of a teacher, through a living tradition. So in that sense, we are on one hand approaching this in a very rational way, and that's of course something that we can understand intellectually, but so much of this really is also premised on, you could say, a love affair, a degree of openness, a degree of surrender, not in the sense of being naive, but in the sense of appreciating this to the extent that we're willing to try this and it intrigues us, so that we're willing to sort of experiment with this in, you could say, all aspects of our psychology and our experience of our subjective first person experience. And that's where there really has to be this deep sense of trust, and you could say giving the author benefit of the doubt, giving the teacher the benefit of the doubt. And also, this is not really just about Thinley Norbu Rinpoche, but it's also about the whole lineage. It's about a long tried and tested tradition, I guess we could call it. Lineage comes down from the Buddha, comes down from the primordial awakened principle, and down to our present teacher. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche is very contemporary. Three of his sons actually, have roles as teachers. And in this way, we're really part of a living legacy of experience. And it's within that kind of openness and that kind of trust that something beyond the rational mind, which we generally refer to as blessings, can emerge. So, so having these in place, really having both the attitude of wishing to benefit the larger community of all sentient beings, and also this trust in the teacher is something that will enable us to make a lot more sense of what we're presently studying. To your right, you have Dunjum Lingpa, and we say Thinley Norbu Rinpoche in his previous life as Tukutrime was the son of Dunjum Lingpa, and in this life, he was then the son of the incarnation of Dunjum Lingpa, who was then known as Dunjum Rinpoche. So presently, we are looking at then you could say the culmination of this work, which is meditation practice. And everything we study in the Buddhist teaching is really just to facilitate us beginning to work with our experience. And that equates really, that is synonymous with meditation practice. But it's not just that we, you would say, dabble, or we do, of course, experiment, and we are about being sensitive to subtle aspects of our mind. But there is also structure. And we have from the Buddha, from Thinley Norbu Rinpoche, from the masters of the lineage, indications and guidance in how to approach meditation. And meditation is more than just us understanding something and thinking about it. It's us actually beginning to transform our experience, to begin to touch a deeper level of truth. And this is what we're presently going to look at then. This requires, above all, that we are present, that we are not mindless, that we're properly participating in our life. Rinpoche says, my grandfather of mindfulness must watch constantly after this spoiled child of deluded mind to prevent him from disaster. And this is then followed by some injunctions about how we shouldn't expect circumstances to be ideal. We might look at the sages of the past and think, oh, I shouldn't go anywhere, to just stay in one place. And then we look at other sages who went everywhere. And then we think, gosh, I like to rather stay where I am. And Rinpoche's point, of course, is that sometimes it's difficult to do exactly like the sages of the past, and we shouldn't really pitch our expectations on the basis of the externals, but really on our determination to practice right here and now. So this lines up with the whole, we could say, theme of this chapter, which really is presence, mindfulness, the integration of wisdom, the seeing through ordinary confusion, and the sensitivity to the dimension of our mind that is not contaminated with confusion, namely wisdom. So we're going to look then at how this is done, particularly in what we call the three inner tantras, and of course in the general Vajrayana. There's some themes that we work with. Generally, we work with what we call development stage practice and completion stage practice. Development stage practice is integrating our situated experience of body, speech, and mind, and in general, everything that we really come across, everything that constitutes our being, our history, the entire realm of who we are. And that's integrated in the path of the development stage practice. And this, again, development stage practice is something that we engage, where we engage enlightened vision on the basis of our bodily experience, our energetic speech experience, and our mental experience. And that's where we then practice yoga. And yoga here means to align ourselves with the subtle elements, to align ourselves with the secret essence of our being and the display of this secret essence. And so where the general Buddhist teaching is, of course, about eliminating confusion and unveiling a quality of awakening. In the Vajrayana, right from the start, on the basis of the blessing of the teacher, we engage with this awakened nature as a reality that underpins our entire existence, and particularly then underpins our experience of body, speech, and mind. So the development stage practice very much is about integrating enlightenment within our experience of body, speech, and mind. And then there's more subtle aspects then of meditation practice, which has to do with relinquishing any kind of reference point and simply just settling in the nature of mind, which then results in the experience of bliss, clarity, and emptiness. And in practicing this kind of more subtle practice of meditation, we continually rely on mindfulness in the general sense of mindfulness, and then on limitless mindfulness, teachings such as the Great Madhyamika, the Great Perfection, and so on. And then there's a discussion about how, in this context, then we experience freedom from the grip of our ordinary obscurations, which are then the modes of liberation. And then there's some discussion about what we mean with shamatha and vipassana. You could say the practice of calm abiding and insight, and how meditation and post-meditation, nyamshak and jetop, they are approached, and also some introduction to what we call the 4 samayas, the 4 commitments. The teachings that we have here, like I was saying, they really belong to the most profound aspect of the Vajrayana. And you could say that we're studying this presently, and that Rinpoche presents this to us in this exquisite, poetic manner. It will enable us to connect with these teachings. They will form the basis of our teachings, and they will also create the auspicious conditions that you could say Vajrayana teaching, not just Vajrayana method, because there's a lot of extremely profound Vajrayana method that's taught in the modern world, but we should supplicate really that the great lineage masters will begin to teach really the inner meaning that's revealed here. They can say the inner meaning of the tantras. So Rinpoche says, instead of really practicing Dharma, we often only talk about practicing Dharma. The more we talk without practicing, the more we lose our energy in words, and so the more our point of view is lost. According to the Buddhist path, if we are true practitioners, whether we are praying, offering, or practicing yoga, visualization, or meditation, the essence is always the unobscured, established point of view. It is best to remember that for practitioners, the point of view is beyond description. So whatever we're doing, we continually come back to what we call the view, which is not, in the Vajrayana, is not something philosophical. It is then the co-emergent wisdom that has been introduced by our teacher. And that's why it's important that we don't obscure this by externalizing our path in terms of rendering it into language in which we then externalize it, objectify it, and all of a sudden it becomes, you could say, gross material substance. Through this externalizing, solidifying, and that's where experience no longer really is something that transforms us, but rather just becomes something that obstructs us. So beginning with the relating to body, and that's again coming back to what Rinpoche initially says at the beginning of the chapter in terms of these two ways in which we might aspire to practice and yet find that we just can't do it. It's about us needing to practice right here, right now, with where exactly we are. And of course, we should look at the example of great masters of the past. Everyone has always done that. And that is, you'd say, our point of reference. But at the same time, we need to do what we realistically can do right now. So of course, while we should look at masters of the past, such as the great Indian siddhas, the Tibetan siddhas, because what they have done is exactly what we're doing, and yet their circumstances might be different. We might be living in a very different context than they did, and yet the core of what they did is the same. So, of course, as we're practicing, then a lot of energy comes up, and very often we have lots of, we have lots of inspiration. We want to write haikus. We want to talk about what we're experiencing and so on. And it's a little bit like the story of these silly cranes that that were all flying above a place where they're in great danger, loudly telling each other, be quiet, yeah, now be quiet, and so on. So then in terms of practice, we engage the pure nature of our body, our speech, and our mind. So while we ordinarily experience and think of ourselves in terms of our karmically constructed body, speech, and mind, there's the underlying, you could say, manifestative, or the ordinary, the display that originates from the secret essence, which manifests in terms of the physical appearances and so on. And however much these energetic appearances, these mental appearances, however much we have of various kinds of experiences, they never move from the original ground. And that's why we would say our body, speech, and mind intrinsically possesses a dimension of purity. And this is the yoga that we then engage with. This is the path then of yoga that the Vajrayana engages. Yeah. So the 5 elements, they can be purified. So when we have various kinds of ailments or various kinds imbalances in our body, we can remedy this on the basis of working with our breath. So when we are practicing breathing, so then we are using, of course, the gross elements in terms of our body and our breath, but it also enables us to connect with more subtle aspects of our being, in terms of the pure aspects of earth, water, fire, wind, space, etc. And this again enables us to connect with the secret essence element, which is then Buddha nature or deity. So again, all along in the Vajrayana, when we're engaging in the sacred principles, we're continually relating to this unobstructed, pure quality that's innate and intrinsic to all appearances. So in this way, like Rinpoche describes in the book, yogis use the pranas, these 5, aspects of working with our breath in terms of the 5 elements. So this is how yogis overcome illness. So of course, when we generally approach yoga in a modern context, it's very much sort of the idea of hatha yoga as a way to become more radiant, more healthy, more beautiful, and all of that. Because yoga does that. Yoga does align ourselves with an innate quality that is pure. But again, without really a vision of this innate secret element of Buddha nature, then we really just have something that's nice to look at. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, even without believing in the secret wisdom potential of the elements, by making their bodies lighter, some gymnasts who have practiced yoga show that they can find the subtle elements within the gross elements. Through their activities, they automatically reveal their stamina and the vital capacities existing dormantly within, which arise from the original nature of their elements. Perfecting their bodies through the light elements, they play and compete with other light element bodies in front of gross element spectators who watch with gross element eyes and award gross element medals, really meaning, thank you so much for letting me see your light elements. So these are, you could say, the yoga, there's yoga and yoga. So yoga practice with the view of the secret vast essence which is then what we do in the Vajrayana, brings the wisdom deity body. So that's very different from just working with the aspect that brings out incredible qualities based on the lighter elements, and yet fails really to connect with the quality that is the actual source. Now, on the Vajrayana path, Buddhist yogis invoke wisdom deity through Vajrayana sadhana. Sadhana, lebzang in Tibetan, is really the way in which we engage this vision of the Vajrayana, the vision of purity. And what we have here in this chapter is really, and also throughout Magic Dance, is continually sharing this vision of the Vajrayana, the understanding of the subtle aspects and the pure aspects of our elements. So when we engage Vajrayana sadhana, this purifies the gross elements and perfects wisdom deity body. So this purifies our gross physical elements, and it also purifies our entire perception in terms of our identity and our person and our context and so forth. And someone who has practiced Vajrayana sadhana, perfecting this, then no longer is tied up with karmic body, but is someone who continually experiences this presence of non-confused, pure wisdom deity. And as at death, then they're liberated and manifest wisdom deity body. We would say there's no difference between the inside and the outside at that point. Presently, you could say the wisdom deity body in such a yogi is hidden, but when at the time of death, it's like a jar that's broken, and the innate natural quality of the yogi's body then becomes fully manifest. So such individuals, they're not waiting for the gross element audience to applaud them. Their reward is the praise of the enlightened ones. And also within Vajrayana sadhana, actually that's part of it. The praise then within Vajrayana sadhana, there is actually a component of praise from the enlightened ones. And then also through such yoga, then there's spontaneously the benefiting of all beings. There's spontaneously what we call the two benefits, the benefiting self in terms of eliminating confusion, and benefiting others in terms of spontaneously interacting with others from the place of no self and non-confusion. So Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, Buddhist practitioners who believe in deity phenomena understand that they are light, invisible, unobstructed, and can miraculously appear anywhere because they pervade everywhere. Because of this, they acknowledge the secret wisdom potential of the elements within their own body and practice with visualization, sadhana, and mudra. So that's where the wisdom is not just seen purely in terms of just, you could say, an intangible component, but it's also something that actually abides within wisdom. And for that reason also, then the practitioners worked with the element of visualization, working with, you could say, the sense of perception of form, and in general engage with the practice of sadhana practices, and within that also practices such as mudra. And this actually led me to think of something from Togurjen Rinpoche, so I'm just going to bring that in there. As many of you know, Togurjen Rinpoche was a very great Dzogchen master. But when he talks about Dzogchen, he never ever sees this as being apart from the general Vajrayana practice, such as what we're talking about here. And there's a place where he says, Vajrayana is also represented as the four gates: mudras, offerings, recitations, and samadhi. He says they are traditionally described like this. The verbal gate of utterance is to remind of the ultimate. The secret gate of mantra is to invoke the samayas. The mental gate of samadhi is to keep one-pointed focus. The playful gate of mudra is to link gesture with meaning. Rinpoche Rinpoche says, these are extremely important. Watching a person who knows these 4 gates and can manifest or apply them, it might look like a lot of childish play, moving the hands, shifting objects around in the air, chanting different tunes and recitations, wearing costumes, and so on. All this can look completely contrived. Some people find it to be extremely superficial and beside the point. They may complain by saying, the real thing, the real Buddhist practice is only to recognize mind essence. Those who say this lack a true understanding of Vajrayana because all 4 gates are incredibly significant and important and are never to be regarded as pointless. And that is exactly what Thinley Norbu Rinpoche also is saying here, really, that as we practice the Vajrayana, we do so from this place of the vast secret essence, and yet we engage skillfully all our various styles of perceptions, all the various levels of the elements. And this we do then on the basis of the Vajrayana sadhana, which then includes practices such as mudra, such as various forms of yoga, etc. So that's a little bit about body. Then Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, if we wish to attain wisdom, deity, speech, we must purify our gross and subtle elements. Those who do breathing yoga or dance exercises are especially adept at purifying their gross elements into light elements, so their sound becomes resonant and clear as their earth elements nerves become transparent like crystal. Consequently, their water elements become very pure, their air elements become very light, and their ordinary conceptions are transformed into unobscured wisdom clarity. In this way, words are always true and meaningful and very light. Those who speak like this are naturally and unintentionally attractive, and whoever hears their speech is drawn to them. So this we might experience when we come across great Vajrayana yogis. We might find that we can't take our eyes off them, and that whenever they speak, pretty much regardless of what they might say, we hang on every word. And this is really because the speech comes from this place of deep connection, deep sense of truth. 2 kinds of enlightened speech: the intangible and then the more tangible, inconceivable secret speech, which is the ultimate kind of speech, and then the expression of all existing aspects, what we're more familiar with in terms of the sort of languages that we're familiar with. Now, in absolute truth, these are not 2 different things. As we can see, great beings, the speech of great beings, they mingle these 2 aspects. However, in relative truth, our language reflects the division of outer and inner. And that's where, as we become increasingly sort of alienated between ourselves and the other, and increasingly confused, then with that kind of division, we lose the power of truth and speak with confusion. And like Rinpoche says, that's where we end up contriving our speech to the degree that we even speak untruth. So that's where you could say the corruption of our elements, the corruption of our own purity leads to this kind of external manifestation. So in pure relative truth, so in the purity of appearances that never move from reality, then unborn sound gives rise to pure phenomena. So the most subtle aspect of pure phenomena, or of phenomena in their unconfused state, is then the subtle sounds. So for example, when we practice Vajrayana, we begin with seed syllables. This again represents then the unborn intangible quality, and from those seed syllables then all phenomena arise as the unity of appearance and emptiness. Failing to understand truth, then we have deluded perception, and at that point then we have karmic sound that's on the basis of our particularly confused constructions, then perpetuate our dualistic experience of afflicted phenomena. So karmic speech and sound, they're based on the interplay of the 5 gross elements. And on the basis of that, this gives rise to languages, realms, and karmic perceptions. When the elements are impure, it affects our faculties and health. And that's also where we're more prone to poor health. If the elements are balanced and light, then the voice is melodious. So there's all science around the way that sound really lies at the bottom of all phenomena, and how all languages, and as such also Rinpoche gives these examples with A, B, and C, how they actually reflect the disposition of the elements, and how, for example, in different countries, different you can say elements are prevalent, and as a result also their particular languages reflect this. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, if the elements are balanced and light, the blood and air elements flow smoothly and the voice is melodious. Those whose air elements are pure will have an especially good tone when they sing or talk, although the qualities of their words will depend on their inner spiritual qualities. Yoga of mind. So there are countless traditions, and that's where Rinpoche also involves general, what he refers to as general phenomena that we have in various cultures, various contexts, that point to that which is beyond appearances. So there's always, you could say, noble symbols that point to something of profound value. This can be anything there can be anything in terms of just cultures that uphold particular values beyond the ordinary confused habitual patterns. So we might, for example, put up statues or symbols that symbolize the higher values or higher truths of our particular culture. In the context of Dharma, wisdom, the context of Buddha Dharma, the path of complete awakening, then we symbolize wisdom with a sword. And we also symbolize other qualities of the awakened nature that's beyond language with various symbols like that. So we would say unlimited wisdom achieves the primary purpose of cutting through confusion. So that's why we have the sword, the Vajra, and so on. But we also have other symbols that are used also because these really come from qualities of wisdom. So these other symbols they fulfill, and wisdom as such fulfills other purposes as well. And in Vajrayana sadhana, the wisdom is symbolized with tools such as swords, kilas being the dagger or whatever we call it, like the deities like Vajrakilaya hold like that. We also have we have different kinds of symbols like that, arrows and so forth. This also because in Vajrayana sadhana, then very often when you invoke the qualities of body, speech, and mind, you do so where the body is symbolized by the deity's form, the speech is symbolized by syllables, and the deity's mind is symbolized by various weapons or attributes, tools. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says we use certain particular sadhanas and texts to realize unobstructed, limitless wisdom display. If we do not use our own inherent wisdom weapons, we must rely on symbolic weapons to destroy obstructions. But symbolic weapons are limited. If we realize our inherent wisdom weapon, we can penetrate everywhere without limited gross element means. So that's where the wisdom, of course, is that which is intangible. Sometimes we symbolize this with various implements, and that can be very powerful. And yet, of course, the ultimate wisdom is this inherent wisdom. The ultimate weapon is the inherent wisdom. So this covers certain important aspects of of the development stage practice in the Vajrayana path. Now we're looking more at then completion stage aspects. And that's where we're talking about some experiences that inevitably happen when we're practicing the path. So Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, in general, Buddhists practice to subdue their minds. They are meditating in order to purify the heavy gross elements into light subtle elements and then into their pure secret essence, in order not to remain in dull, empty space. Through meditation, Buddhists want to know stainless wisdom awareness mind, which has unobstructed, pure light qualities. So in the Vajrayana path, we work with 4 empowerments. And the first empowerment is very much integrating the vision, integrating that on the basis of experience of wisdom and also on the basis of our conceptual mind. So the sadhana engages conceptual mind, but all the time it is in fact pointing to that which is beyond concepts. And so that's where the first empowerment is very much about this dimension of engaging a pure vision of reality. And that's associated then with what we call the Vaj's empowerment. The following 3 empowerments, the secret, wisdom, and word empowerment, they then engage more subtle aspects of our being. And so as we proceed along the path with then what we call the 3 more profound aspects, then we engage the aspects of the subtle experiences that are the natural display of unconfused mind. And so these are then generally characterized as bliss, clarity, and non-thought. And depending on our particular disposition, some people are more disposed towards one or the other. So in the case of the experience of bliss that happens when we meditate, if we're attached to that, this is something that gives rebirth in the God realms of desire. Sometimes in general, we refer to this as taking rebirth in the realm of desire, or the kama rupa, the kama loka. The kama loka, which is you could say it's probably 95% of samsara. But that's where it's important for us to, as bliss arises, to not be attached to it through our habitual pattern, but mingling it with insight into wisdom, emptiness. Then this is something that enhances our experience of luminosity and brings what we call blissful emptiness luminosity. Similarly, attachment to clarity, which also arises, this can give rebirth into the God realms of form, or what we call Rupa Loka, the form realm, which is then the God realms. And again, this is where we want to, when clarity arises, to mingle this with wisdom, and that brings about then stainless, empty luminosity. This enhances our experience of luminosity. And then the attachment to emptiness of non-thought, this can give rebirth in the formless realm, Arupa Lok, which is then the again God realms. And that's where, when clarity arises, we need to mingle it with wisdom, and this will then enhance our experience of luminosity and bring about what we call undiluted awareness emptiness. So that's why it's important for us to engage these experiences that happen on the path. Of course, initially, then there's all sorts of, when we're working with the mind, there's all sorts of dealing with neurosis and confusion and so on. But after a while, then this gives way to being free of these ordinary psychological phenomena. And then there is then these experiences of bliss, clarity, and non-thought, which we might then think, oh, this is extraordinary. This is really special. And that's where it's important that we're not seduced by the appearance aspects of these, and that we continually come back to recognizing wisdom in the midst of these experiences. So this is now about mindfulness. Let's see here. Yeah, this comes already here. Anyway, what happens is that we have gross and subtle conceptions. Yeah, we have, we have the ordinary thoughts that we're familiar with. They might be gross anger, gross desire, and so on. But then there's subtle conceptions, and these constitute this sort of sometimes subtle forms of attachment. So the recognition and purification of the gross thoughts is in a way easily enough, but the undercurrent of subtle thoughts, this requires a great deal of mindfulness. So Rinpoche says, by recognizing these gross conceptions, we can be liberated from them. In meditation, when we think we're having pure conceptions, it is usually the gross conceptions which are diminishing, while the undercurrent of subtle ones continues to move unrecognized, like the subtle activity of springs under the still surface of a pond covered with husks of grain. Because it is so difficult to recognize the subtle activity of mind, is always dangerous and is the seed of the passions which create gross phenomena. To purify these subtle element conceptions, beginning practitioners must depend on remembering mind or mindfulness. So that's where presence of mind is so important. We also sometimes say it's a bit like when you have a marsh. You have something that looks like a meadow and you think you can walk into it, and you walk into it and you just sink in because it's just water actually all around. And so that's where we have this undertow of the subtle thoughts. So that's why we need to have this two kinds of mindfulness, really. There's mindfulness of perception, which is knowing ourselves in relation to our experience. And that's where we know that we are having anger, we know we are having desire, whatever, and we remain undistracted. But there's very much the presence of these kind of conceptions. And that's why we sustain mindfulness in the midst of what we're perceiving. So that's what would require some effort. So this kind of mindfulness of perception is also known as the mindfulness of perception through effort. Then there's a kind of mindfulness which is without effort, which is then settling into reality that is not in any way partial to appearance or emptiness, and is simply just present within what is. So this is what eventually arises from our persevering in the mindfulness of perception. So this joins with the mindfulness of Dharmata, the unconditional secret essence. So we have these two mindfulnesses: mindfulness of perception, Duche Kijempa or Tsolche Duche Kijempa, and then we have Cheni Kijempa, mindfulness of Dharmata. So we begin with analytical meditation and eventually just settle the mind. So the first has a lot to do with us actually practicing analytical meditation, which all the time analyzes what's happens. So we're all the time on, if you like. And some traditions, they would say you must sustain that always. You must always have that analytical component. But here, particularly in the Great Perfection teaching and also in Mahamudra, then we would say that eventually we just settle the mind. So we have two kinds of meditations really, with this analytical meditation and settling meditation. And it's important then when we practice meditations, particularly settling meditation, that we do this just actually settling without any kind of wishing for something particular to happen, without expectation. Rinpoche says, if we expect enlightenment right now, then enlightenment goes farther and farther away. If we assume that enlightenment is far away, then again we create faraway conceptions, and enlightenment goes farther and farther away. These calculations create distance, time, and boundaries. So this is a very important point, because as much as we are on the path, this path actually consists of relating with what is right here, right now, without any expectations for something further to actually happen. We don't sit and wait like the cat waiting for the mouse to come out from its little hole. Rinpoche says mindfulness is most important in practice, of course, but it is also necessary in worldly affairs. Without mindfulness, nothing can be accomplished. We would miss the time, lose the meaning of words, miscalculate everything, and always miss the target. So as much as mindfulness is something that we're employing here in the context of meditation, it is also something that's absolutely indispensable. It's something that we always depends on, and that's where Rinpoche gives this this rather funny David and Goliath story with the secret trick that was provided by the diminutive wrestler's wife, which resulted then in bringing down this giant, his Achilles heel sitting in a delicate place, and actually entirely due to lack of mindfulness. So this is where, as his last words, his last gasps as he's passing on, this giant, he exclaims, "The most powerful giant who lost his mindfulness has been killed by a slight opponent who kept his mindfulness. My life has ended today because mindlessly I grasped for the deceiving fantasy jewel which I forgot I had from the beginning, and so I lost the jewel of my mindfulness. There is no jewel more precious than the most precious jewel of mindfulness." So, limitless mindfulness. Let's just see if there's some questions here. Mindfulness of perception, is this prajna, what you were explaining on Sunday? No, prajna, well, it facilitates prajna. On the basis of practicing mindfulness of perception, then we get less caught up. The ordinary perceptions, the ordinary outer perceptions, the ordinary kleshas that we have and all of that, these have less grip on us. And this enables prajna to emerge. So we could say mindfulness of perception has a bit more to do with shamatha, and prajna has more to do with vipassana. Yeah. But basically, yes, on the basis of mindfulness and of perception, then prajna emerges. So then there's limitless mindfulness. And this is more to do then with the second kind, which is mindfulness of dharmata. But for us to understand the principles of mindfulness in its, you could say, in its ultimate capacity, then we speak here, Rinpoche here presents this notion of limitless mindfulness. So that's where it's very helpful. It's very helpful if we're not limited the way that we ordinarily is. Thinking, okay, now I'm meditating, now I'm not meditating. This is my meditation period, now I'm not meditating, and so on. We shouldn't limit what we're doing really by time. Of course, we need to have some regularity, and it needs to be part of the way we do things, but there should never be a sense that this is separate from the rest of our life. And that's where our samadhi, our mindfulness, our presence of mind should flow like an endless flowing river. And this is also something that Rinpoche makes a point about, how it's not drawing on a particular experience. It's on that which is unconditional, the secret essence, the nature of mind, the wisdom, co-emergent wisdom that's introduced through the Guru's blessings. That unconditional nature is something that's not contaminated, not conditioned in any way. So that's why it's an inexhaustible flowing river. So that's where, when we apply that, we of course we have a particular posture, but we shouldn't be limited by that. And there should be this balance continually between body and mind in this open experience of non-duality. So that's where Rinpoche proposes that we settle in emptiness, which is free from mental activity or conceptual constructs, clear space, sky, mind. And again, emptiness here doesn't mean nothingness, but it means the wisdom that's not entangled in ordinary dualistic mental activity or conceptual constructs. Rinpoche says, if we are always trapped and limited by time, place, and direction, how can we have wisdom, mind, confidence? How can we understand other people's faculties and benefit other beings? How can we help limited mind with limited meditation mind? So it's important that or rather we should aspire to really arriving at a place of practice in which we in no way the practice is in any way limited or conditioned in terms of time, space, etc. So when we sit down and meditate, what we really are doing, and of course we use language here to describe this, and it can be very often meditation is described in so many different ways. But one way to describe it is like Rinpoche is describing here, really, in terms of being free from the ordinary dualistic entanglement, the notion of identity, our first person subjective experience in which we think I and other, and then we have, which is the skandha of form, then the skandha of like, dislike, the skandha of feeling, the skandha of perception, in which we have all the various narratives, then the skandha of impulse, on the basis of these likes and dislikes, narratives, and so on, that we engage and are driven by particular mental factors, and the notion of consciousness that basically holds all of this together. All of that constitutes really the basis for our sense of self. And that's where meditation has to be free from this ordinary entanglement. So the various kinds of upadeshas or pith instructions that we have on meditation achieve this. But here we can see one way of explaining how we do this in terms of what it is we need to be free of. When we do that, when we achieve vipassana on the basis of this kind of practice, then according to the general Mahayana and according to the middle way teaching, Madhyamika, we then settle without any obscuration on the basis of the skandhas in the notion of self, and we settle free of any conceptual constructs, nishprapancha or trujal, which is then the objective of the Mahayana path. That's where we're free from really obscurations. In the Vajrayana, this is of course also the basis of the Vajrayana, but that's where, in addition to being free from the ordinary conceptual constructs, there are also then the quality of the luminosity that arises, in which then the appearances of in which the skandhas and the elements, they arise within non-duality. And that's why they then constitute this blissful union of subject and object. And that's why we have the 5 Buddhas and consorts in union. And that's why we use this image or this metaphor of sexual union, as there's no longer the pain of dualistic difficulty when you have a subject sort of trying to handle the object. And when there's no longer that, then the engagement between subject and object is blissful. There's not the ordinary duality. So in some way, we're saying the same thing, really, when we talk about the 5 Buddhas and consorts, and when we talk about the freedom from conceptual constructs. But this is also where it's important to understand. This is why also Vajrayana gets so misunderstood. You juxtapose a Zen temple and a Vajrayana temple, and you might think that they're doing something very different, which they're not. In terms of the wisdom, there's no difference between the Zen temple and the Vajrayana temple. But in terms of skillful means, then there is engaging the whole entire limitless array of phenomenal appearances as the path and as an expression of the original ground. And that's why this is essentially the engagement of the unity of appearance and emptiness. So you can say the scripture basic to that would be, for example, the Heart Sutra, which is what both the Zen tradition and the Vajrayana tradition have as their foundation. And yet, what the Vajrayana goes on to do is engage this unity of appearance and emptiness all across the board with regards to all apparent phenomena. And that's where all the ordinary appearances no longer are seen in terms of duality, they arise in terms of the blissful mandala of deity. So from between Zen temple and in Vajrayana temple, tantric temple, huge difference in appearance, but it's only really a difference in terms of the presence or absence of skillful means. The object of wisdom is the same. So when the path emptiness merges with the result of great emptiness, all dualistic concepts exhaust. So this is what the path brings about. The tantric practitioner merges limited path luminosity with unlimited result luminosity at death, like a child running to its mother. So someone who sustains this mindfulness throughout their life is then, you could say, someone practicing what we call child luminosity, and is then at the time of death in this limited luminosity, as it's aligned with the unlimited luminosity, the mother luminosity. We would say it's just like a child running to its mother, or running into the mother's lap. So this is how we generally understand the path, and particularly then when it comes to the great perfection, all of this is really understood in terms of just the practitioner settling into primordial purity without grasping. This, of course, is again something that's very much premised on the pointing out the nature of this practice, which lies beyond concepts, by a teacher with whom one has, you could say, a particular bond, and where there's a particular openness in which the blessing of the teacher can properly penetrate the student. So Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, if we are experienced meditators, just remembering mind recognizes gross element conceptions, we must remain in mindfulness. According to a Mahasandhi text, if we chase after conceptions, more conceptions arise, producing more confusion and trouble. And we are like the stupid dog who chases after every stone instead of concentrating on the stone thrower. If we just remain in mindfulness, we are like the lion who kills the stone thrower instead of chasing after the stone. So we don't follow after all the thoughts that arise. We just go back to where they originate from and settle on that. That's getting to the heart of the matter. Just chasing after all the various thoughts that come up is endless. And that's where we give the example of where in India, unfortunately, there's a rather bad practice of throwing stones after dogs, and the dog usually will throw a stone after a dog, it'll bark at the stone. Whereas when you throw a stone after a lion, it actually doesn't worry too much about the stone. It just wants to see who threw that stone. And that's where this is an image for the practice that we are talking about here, to get to the actual recognition of the origins of thoughts and settle into that. So we speak about modes of liberation then, where the experienced meditators, they free their thoughts as when recognizing an old acquaintance. So someone who has been introduced to mind essence, then when thoughts arise, they're not really worried about what is arising. They simply just come back to the essence of mind. And that's where the entanglement of ordinary thoughts is a bit like a snake unwinding, which it does very easily. Or as drawing on water, as you draw on the water, it just dissolves as we're drawing. So that's where there's, at the end, there's no harm or benefit from thoughts, just like a thief entering an empty house. So this we often speak about as the four modes of liberation. So we say So then a little bit discussion of what we call shamatha and vipassana, calm abiding, in which we have non-distraction, and then vipassana, which is then insight, wisdom. And vipassana is a very important word in the Buddhist teaching because it is really that which frees us. We're not freed through all sorts of strange things, but essentially we're just freed through looking. We see, and we're no longer deluded. So that's where the Buddha's, you could say, remedy for our particular predicament, which is samsara, is to actually look what's there. That's actually what the Buddha wants. All the various paths that we have are really just enabling us to deprogram ourselves from our habituation to all sorts of ideas about how to handle things and so on, and essentially our inability to just settle within reality. But the Buddha's, all the teachings of the Buddha, they are essentially just to facilitate this seeing the nature of reality. Now, what we call shamatha and vipassana then is essentially, you could say, the skillful means. The shamatha is the producing the calm, and then the insight that emerges from that. So in the general Buddhist path, the foundational path of the Hinayana, we say shamatha is the non-distracted mindfulness. And that's where at that time we're determined. We're not distracted or carried away. We have that renunciation, determination. And it's on the basis of that non-distraction that we then gain an insight into this reality of that there actually is no essential, substantial phenomenon or essence in any of our perceptions of neither aspects of our being, our psychology, nor of the perceived phenomenal world. In the Mahayana path, then shamatha is then the calm that comes from properly on the basis of what we call establishing the two kinds of selflessness, then settling into this freedom from conceptual constructs, or what we call the middle way beyond the extremes, which is really the most beautiful thing we can do. This is what we all aspire to in terms of this is the ultimate freedom from dogma, the ultimate freedom from our ordinary habitual insecurity, and simply just beginning to commune with reality without our having a particular opinion, a particular philosophical or metaphysical position in regard to phenomena, but simply just properly being there. And it's on the basis of this then that there's the quality of compassion that naturally arises, where there's the natural ethical impulse to benefit others, because there's no longer the retreating into the agenda of a self. Then this experience of wisdom naturally facilitates the outpouring of compassionate engagement with the world, but at the same time also without any notion of I am being compassionate to so-and-so. And that's where the middle way beyond extremes really facilitates the ultimate kind of compassion, which is inseparable from wisdom. And then on the path of the outer tantras, that's where we engage Buddha nature as it's in its embodiment in terms of body, speech, and mind. And that's where we engage Buddha nature as deity. But initially we engage this as external to ourselves. We might think, oh, I'm not quite there yet, but I'm sure that there is purity. I believe in that. And that's where we then externalize Buddha nature as deity. And that's where the shamatha is the way that we engage with this deity through devotion. Vipassana here is that we begin to identify how the deity abides spontaneously within our body, speech, and mind. And on the path of the inner tantras, then shamatha is recognizing that all phenomena are primordially mandalas of enlightenment, meaning our entire being from the very start and all our perceptions have always existed as deity. And on the basis of that, then relinquishing any reference point whatsoever, then there's no difference between confusion and non-confusion, samsara and nirvana. So then discussion about meditation and post-meditation, what we in Tibetan call nyamchak and jetop. This is very often, nyamchak is often, it means settling into equanimity, or sometimes referring to as equipoise. And jetop actually means literally post-attainment. So actually means, or afterglow, if you like. It's what we sustain after meditation. It's integration. So nyamchak, resting in stainless emptiness, or if you like, equanimity or equipoise. Jetop is then the integration after such resting. And that's what we call post-meditation then. Now, when we're meditating, it's important that we don't think, oh yeah, now that I'm meditating, I should do something else. Or now I should make my offerings. And, you know, of course, meditation means that we set some boundaries. But we might actually think, oh yeah, but I should also be doing this and that, which is virtuous actions. And actually, while we're meditating, we shouldn't concern ourselves, even with a virtue. At the time of meditation, this is where we begin to discover this nature, which is uncontaminated by any conditioning whatsoever. So that's why it's important we don't you could say, begin to generate duality when we're actually connecting with non-duality. Jetsun Milarepa, he famously says, when you are in Mahamudra meditation, if you are concerned about accumulating the merits of body and speech, your wisdom mind may disappear. So that's when we meditate. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, the pure power of illusory element phenomena comes from stainless emptiness space. This sky-space energy permeates the gross element energy of phenomena so that everything appears subtle, light, and illusory. The benefit of Jakob post-meditation is that whoever sees all phenomena as display does not cling to or reject illusory objects, and in this way is accumulating merit. As Tilopa said to Naropa, until we realize that all phenomena are unborn, we must continuously turn the wheel of the accumulation of merit and wisdom. So while we don't get entangled in ordinary notion of merit and so forth with the body and speech, when we're meditating, in post-meditation, then if we can sustain proper Jakob, if we can sustain proper post-meditation experience and not in any way be subject to our ordinary projections, then spontaneously we accumulate merit. But overall, it applies in post-meditation that as long as we have, until we have complete realization, we do need to work with these two aspects of accumulating merit and accumulating wisdom. Because they connect with merit is the way with which we connect our ordinary experience in ordinary life and our ordinary dualistic phenomena, the way that we connect that with enlightenment. And wisdom is directly connecting with enlightenment. So merit is very much about doing, and wisdom is very much about not doing. But these two we need to combine, as we say, the unity of skillful means and wisdom, or the unity of the two accumulations. We need to persevere in these until we have complete realization. So for beginners, Nyamshak equipoise means sitting, and Jakob post-meditation means moving. That's how it's generally understood, you know. But of course, eventually, as we become familiar with the practice of meditation, then the two fuse, and meditation and post-meditation become inseparable. Now, when we talk about mindfulness of Dharmata, this is not bound by sitting alone. So that's the unconditional insight that we have that is beyond appearances of any kind. And that is something that's unlimited to whether or not we're sitting. But the moment that we have perception mindfulness and we are actually sustaining mindfulness in the midst of perceptions and aware of perceptions, then that is actually what we call Jakob, even when we are sitting. So that's where even if you're sitting, then we could both have the two aspects of Nyamshak and Jakob, meditation and post-meditation. Of course, this depends how we define this, and this is particularly also according to the Great Perfection, this way of defining the meditation and post-meditation, Nyamshak and Jakob. Rinpoche says, whoever stays in equanimity mind with Dharmata mindfulness is practicing Nyamshak meditation even though their body may move and their speech may sound. Whoever moves from equanimity mind into afterglow of that experience with perception mindfulness is practicing Jakob meditation even though their body is still and their speech is silent. So that's where people might be meditating, but they're still, as long as they're caught up still with working with appearances of the mind, then that, as excellent as it is, and they're doing perception mindfulness, it is actually, from the point of view of that we're talking about here, then that is Jakob post meditation. The other one, staying in that kind of complete natural ultimate mindfulness, then even though someone is moving about, they never move from the absolute nature. There's this famous story about a student, a grumpy student, who goes up to the teacher and says, "Hey, don't you ever meditate?" And the teacher just says, rather, he says, I never see you meditating. And the teacher replies, "Do you ever see me distracted?" So that's why sometimes you have great masters who are beyond the sort of the you could say the ordinary limited kind of meditation. Now, according to inner Vajrayana, then we refer to Nyamshak as stainless great equanimity, and Jakob as pure perception of deity, mantra, and wisdom. This also has to do with what we call the two higher truths, where Nyamshak is the ultimate truth of great equanimity, and relative truth, the higher relative truth, is then the Jakob, in which ordinary perceptions are seen in terms of their purity as deity, mantra, and wisdom. But of course, the highest Vajrayana combines these two. This is what we refer to as the unity of the development and completion stage practices, and then that's where the path then is beyond Nyamshak and Jakob, beyond the division of the two truths. Rinpoche says, to the practitioner who can meditate naturally, there is no difference between the perceiver, the perceived, and the perception, between sitting meditation and moving meditation, or between relative truth and absolute truth. Would you please remind us, what are the two kinds of selflessness? Selflessness of person, so that's everything that we refer to as subject, me, and selflessness of phenomena, and that's everything we refer in terms of object. So that's where we would say everything that's external to us. But of course, we'd say that's how we generally would define it. Yeah. Can we still experience deity without practicing sadhana? In theory, yes, but it might be difficult without, you could say, all the conditions there in order to properly understand what we mean with it and introducing the nature of deity and so forth. Is it possible to surf one's teacher's mind while meditating, to enter the Nyamshak directly, riding their mind, so to speak? Or is it always only self-arising? Well, I guess so. We know surfers, they sort of they sort of they're able to sort of engage in reality from a very smooth angle. But yes, in principle, the thing is, we don't really refer to it as surfing. I kind of know what you mean. I guess we could even say hitchhike. With the get with the teacher's mind. In that sense of mingling our mind with the teacher. And that, yes, this we can do on the basis of strong devotion. When there really is this awe, and this devotion, and this love and openness with the teacher, and not just as the teacher as an object, but really the teacher's being. And that is, you could say, really the foundation for the Vajrayana. And that's where we would say, without the accumulation of merit, without purification, and without the blessing of an authentic teacher, to think that one could engage the self-arising or co-emergent wisdom would be foolish. So yes, it's not only possible, we actually are, you could say, we have to surf the teacher's mind while we meditate. It's an interesting term. Okay. So this comes from what we call definitive scriptures, because of course, when the patient is cured, then all the talk of diagnostics and you could say prescriptive practices and so on falls away. And similarly, also in the absolute, there's no notion of there having ever been suffering or the cause of suffering. There's simply just the third noble truth, if you like, cessation. There's also no notion of path. So that's where simply dwelling in the realization of the unborn, then there is no notion of path or even the need for a path. That's where we identify this quality of the absolute truth that lies beyond any notion of our ordinary dualistic perception. So Rinpoche quotes the Buddha saying, the true truth is unborn, but children cling with hoarse voices to the four truths. For those who enter into the essence of nirvana, there is not even the name of one truth. Then where are the four truths? Nowhere. So that's also like Lodrak Drupchen, he said to Tsongkhapa, he says in the Dharmakaya, in the absolute nature, there's not even the name of the Dharmakaya. So of course, there's no notion of any kind of language in the absolute truth, no notion of any reference points, such as the four truths, or even a single truth. That's the true truth. So now, and this actually comes strictly from the Great Perfection teachings, which is then what we call the four samayas. And these are, in Tibetan, Meba, Chikpo, Jalwa, and Hlundrup, non-existent samaya, Meba, and that basically means non-existence. Nothing has objective existence. And that again comes back to also when we talk about the selflessness, like the two kinds of selflessness. There's nothing within the subjective, nothing within the objective that has any objective absolute existence. That's that we commit to that vision. Then there's soul samaya. All phenomena of samsara and nirvana arise from a single source. And that is this original ground which can be properly perceived or not perceived, but it is that single place. Then there's free samaya. So that's the condition that is neither benefited nor harmed. This nature is at all times rests in this condition where, just like you could say, the thief entering an empty house, there's nothing to be gained by the thief, nothing to be lost by the owner. This nature is completely beyond, you could say, corruption or improvement. And then there's spontaneous samaya. And that's where all the qualities of what we wish with the path is complete within this nature. So the twofold benefit of self and other is spontaneously present. So Rinpoche says spontaneous samaya with regards to the last, and this really is, you could say, the outcome of the vision that we have with the path, where this is samsara's countless desirable qualities and nirvana's measureless desireless qualities arise unobstructedly. This is the essence and display of natural wisdom, deity's magic dance. Compared with countless ordinary precious jewels, mind is priceless because all phenomena increase spontaneously from mind. And that's also where Saraha says, when we see the nature of the mind, it's just like we had found a precious wish-granting jewel in the palm of our hand. So it's within this nature that we then sustain a commitment of understanding non-existence, the single nature of this, the nature in which there's nothing to benefit or harm, there's no hope or fear, and within this, everything that we could ever desire about the path is spontaneously accomplished. So someone who possesses this, Longchenpa says about someone like that, when the true practitioner, meaning somebody who has these four samayas and who abides by them, has realized them, when the true practitioner dies, he is like a beggar in the street, alone with no hope and no one taking care, like an infant who does not even have conceptions about birth and death. And Rinpoche says, whoever can practice these four great samayas is already enlightened, even though their body, which is the result of their previous ripened karma, appears to be an ordinary form. At the end of their life, many ordinary practitioners hope for an auspicious death, to be surrounded by family and disciples, crying, praying, and worshipping in holy style. But when sublime practitioners die, they do not care whether their corpse is put on a golden throne, adorned with jewel crown, and praised and worshipped, or whether it is thrown in the mud of a ruined graveyard and insulted. So this is where we would say the practitioner of the great perfection is ready to just keel over dead on the street. There's nothing to be gained, nothing to be lost. It does prompt the memory of a story Tsuku Trungpa tells in the life of the second Dorupchen, Jigme Punso, who was in a town when he passed away, and he actually did what Dzogchen Yogi would do. He just fell over in the streets, sort of on a slope. And meanwhile, his teacher, who was the incarnation of who was a student of the previous Dorupchen, Jigme Trungpa, and this was Dokenze, who was famously very wrathful. And when the incarnation of his teacher, when he saw him lying there in the mud, sort of on a slope, he came down and he roared at him, "This is not the way the Dorupchen should pass away. Die properly." And it said that the corpse sat up straight, turned around, and sat properly. Anyway, so there you go. Anyway, the implication being that somebody like that is completely beyond any kind of hope and fear. So Rinpoche says, the practitioner who remains confidently in one profound space, in vast equanimity, beyond conceptions of realization or not realization, beyond conceptions of liberation and not liberation, may have this life's form, but it is temporary, like the Garuda's eggshell. The Garuda's offspring already has the confidence and capacity to fly while within its shell, so that when its shell breaks, it can immediately fly in the sky. If we can realize the great perfection point of view in this life, we will understand that from the beginning, the self-awareness perfection Garuda resides within our karmic body. Then, when we leave our karmic body, our inner Garuda, inner wisdom Garuda, flies in the Dharmakaya sky. So that is what we then say. This is the nature of this path. So we could say this is, as we're engaging with this path, we have some idea of where we're going. And even if we don't have these qualities, already now there's an intuitive appreciation of what really is implied here. So Rinpoche then, in conclusion then, sort of like the postscript, he says, whenever we hear from teachers or read in texts that wisdom mind is beginningless, we think this means sometimes before the beginning, far away from the present moment. We must recognize that if from the beginning our wisdom mind is beginningless, it has no beginning, no end, and no between. So it is continuous and always present. This basic original beginningless conception is connected with our path beginningless conception. If through the beginningless path of practice we can recognize the beginningless basis, then there is no more time, only one beginningless beginning now with our mind. So finally, Rinpoche writes, this book comes from beginningless beginning. So there is no beginning, there is no end. Now this book is ended into endless wisdom space, into which all elements become one pure, unending, secret essence. So what we have here is really you could say, it's a relic of the Dharmakaya. This is something that just reading this will connect us with the ultimate, and it not only provides a vision of what this path may bring, but it informs really already at the immediate level of our ordinary relative experience, provides us with a clear perspective on how to shift our ordinary perceptions and begin to engage a vision which is not about imagining something, but which is based on us being more clear and more sensitive to, more perceptive in terms of the actual nature of our perceptions, in terms of the outer perceptions, what they constitute in terms of gross elements, the inner experiences we have in terms of subtle elements, and their ground, which is the unending, beginningless wisdom mind. So as someone who's presenting this, as you can imagine, it's a humbling undertaking to even put some of these words, to have some of these big words, put them out through one's lips, and of course, profoundly humbled by the power of truth that sort of resides in this text. Nevertheless, it's there to be studied, and Rinpoche wrote this text so it could be read, and it was intended for us to pick it up and read it, and it is intended that we ultimately own this material, that we integrate this fully. So, of course, my aspiration with this is that this becomes, you could say, a seed for that to happen for all of us here. So I'd like to thank you all very much for participating in this study, and please don't stop studying this text over and over again. So we'll conclude with a short aspiration summary. I'll actually just if there's some questions. Okay. Let's see here. Hitchhiking. Okay. I have poetry about this. Glad it makes sense to others. Surfing the teacher's mind without grasping and with devotion and humility. Yeah. Yeah, surfing might not be exactly the right word. I think we're talking about a process which really comes about on the basis of, you could say, this great devotion and the great compassion that takes place from the teacher, in which this extraordinary circumstance of blessing can arise. So yes, this is marvelous. So all right, so I guess we'll conclude here. So I'll just conclude with this supplication to Thinley Norbu Rinpoche. I'm not sure who wrote it, but it is very beautiful. It's called the Mind Ornament of Samantabhadra, this short composition. But it is a supplication to Thinley Norbu Rinpoche. From Buddha Amitabha, the color of ruby red, born as a Nyamanakaya in the enclosure of a lotus, as a holder of the heritage of Padmakara's enlightened mind, to the feet of Thinley Norbu, I supplicate. To the royal regent of Padma's spontaneously present Vijayadhara, although having attained union within the state of evenness, sustaining a form of a mature Vijayadhara, you propagate the doctrine of Padma's spontaneously present Vijayadhara-hood. By the power of single-pointedly supplicating you, all appearances are your enlightened body, speech, and mind. And having achieved the mastery of glorious Samantabhadra, may all beings be placed upon the bhumi of your attainment. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. All the very best wishes for your practice. And if you haven't read the book, please do read the book. Please keep studying it. And if some of the terms in here are, you could say, humbling in the sense that we think, oh, I couldn't possibly understand that. Like we always say, there's not anything that doesn't become easier with practice. So as much as we look in this, and also as much as we practice, then these things, this text will really become something that speaks to us. And I think even sometimes, even though we don't, we'd say, understand it in a rational way, there might be an irrational place in which this hits home. So thank you very much.